In the winter of 1869, a cartographer named Ephraim Colby was seated at a drafting table on the third floor of the D.A. Sanborn Map Company's offices in New York City, copying field survey notes from the city of St. Louis onto a fresh linen sheet. His job was precise and narrow: record every building, every wall, every structural footprint exactly as the field surveyor had recorded it, so that insurance underwriters could set their premiums correctly. No interpretation, no embellishment, no guessing. He was not making history. He was making a record. What Ephraim Colby and hundreds of men like him produced between 1867 and 1880 are now considered the most accurate documentary record of urban America that has ever existed for that period. They are called Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps, and across those maps, in city after city, in state after state, there are buildings drawn in careful ink that, according to the official construction record, were never there, not missing, not demolished, never built. The Library of Congress holds more than 700,000 individual Sanborn map sheets covering over 12,000 American cities and towns. The collection is digitized and publicly searchable. Historians, architects, urban planners, and genealogists use it every day. And scattered across that collection, in editions published between 1867 and 1879, are structures that no permit record, no deed, no city directory, and no newspaper announcement has ever acknowledged. Buildings with footprints too large for their listed use. Towers where the street-level record shows vacant lots. Subgrade construction markings that indicate chambers or passages beneath buildings that local history insists were never excavated. These are not drafting errors. The Sanborn Company's methodology was too rigorous for that, and the stakes were too high. Insurance underwriters were pricing real money against these maps. A building drawn on the map that did not exist would cause an underwriter to overprice a policy. A building omitted from the map that did exist would cause an underwriter to underprice one. Either error cost someone money. The Sanborn Company's commercial survival depended on accuracy. Field surveyors walked every block, measured every frontage, and confirmed every building's height, construction material, and occupancy purpose. Each sheet was checked against the prior edition before being submitted. The men who made these maps were not guessing. Before we go any further, if suppressed records and buried history are something you find yourself drawn back to, hit subscribe so the next investigation finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to bury this kind of research, unless you tell it otherwise. To understand why these maps matter in a way that nothing else does, we have to go back to a time that the official history of American cities has never fully reckoned with. The period between 1840 and 1880 was not simply a period of American growth. It was, according to the official account, a period of construction from scratch, a continent being built, city by city, block by block, from raw materials and new labor. That is what the textbooks say. That is what the permit records say. That is what the city directories say. But there is a growing body of independent research suggesting that the official construction history of American cities in the decades immediately following the Civil War contains gaps that mainstream architectural historians refuse to engage with. Buildings appear in photographic records that no permit acknowledges. Foundations are described in demolition contracts that no construction permit ever created. And on the Sanborn maps, the one source that was never meant to document history, only to document insurance liability, structures appear with a precision and a repetition that does not look like error. It looks like something else. Here are 10 of those structures. 10 entries on 10 separate Sanborn maps produced before 1880, each depicting something that historians say was never built. The first is in Cincinnati, Ohio. The 1869 Sanborn Survey of the Riverfront District between Front Street and the Ohio River shows, on Block 7 of the First Ward, a structure labeled in the cartographer's notation as Stone Hall, a rectangular building with a footprint of approximately 90 feet by 40 feet, with walls marked in the solid black ink that Sanborn used exclusively for masonry construction. The building appears on the 1869 sheet and again on the 1875 revision. It does not appear on the 1882 edition. No Cincinnati City Directory between 1865 and 1882 lists a building called Stone Hall at that address. No demolition permit has been located. No construction permit has been located. When the block was photographed for the 1884 city survey, it showed a vacant lot with a concrete apron at grade, the kind of apron that is poured after a foundation is removed. The second is in Chicago, Illinois. The 1871 Sanborn map of the near North Side, produced in the months before the Great Chicago Fire, shows on a half-block parcel north of Ontario Street a structure with a subgrade marking, a hatched rectangle beneath the building footprint that Sanborn cartographers use to indicate basement or sub-basement construction. The marking indicates a sub-basement level measuring approximately 60 feet by 30 feet. The building above is listed as a commercial warehouse. No warehouse at that address appears in any Chicago City Directory, tax roll, or deed record for the period 1865 to 1871. The fire destroyed the block in October of that year. No demolition record exists because the city attributed all losses on that block to the fire, but the subgrade marking was there before the fire. The Sanborn sheet is dated April 1871. The fire was October 1871. The third is in St. Louis, Missouri. The 1875 Sanborn revision of the downtown commercial district shows, on a block in the Fourth Ward that had been mapped 4 times since 1867, a courtyard structure, a building built around a central open space with covered galleries on all 4 interior sides, that appears for the first time in 1875 with a notation suggesting it had been in continuous use. The structure has a footprint comparable to a mid-sized public building. It is labeled only with the abbreviation COM. Hall, no permit exists. No newspaper announcement exists. The structure does not appear in the 1880 edition. A researcher named Gerald Payne, working in the St. Louis Public Library in 1991, located a single reference to a building called Commercial Hall on that block in an 1876 insurance ledger. The ledger listed the building's estimated replacement value at $42,000. A building with that replacement value in 1876 would have required a construction contract that should have been publicly recorded. No such contract has been found. The fourth is in Memphis, Tennessee. The 1873 Sanborn map of the Bluff City's Central District shows, at the corner of Main and Adams, a structure with a rooftop marking that Sanborn surveyors used only for cupola or tower construction. A small circle within the main building footprint, indicating a raised structure above the roofline. The building itself is listed as a dry goods warehouse. No warehouse with a cupola at that corner appears in any Memphis City record, directory, or photographic record from the period. But here is what makes this entry different from the others. The same marking, the same circle, in the same position relative to the building footprint, appears on the 1869 Sanborn map of Louisville, Kentucky, on a building listed there as a storage hall, and it appears again on the 1872 Sanborn map of Nashville, Tennessee, on a building listed as a commercial exchange. 3 cities, 3 different building labels, 1 identical architectural feature that no building permit in any of those 3 cities has ever documented. The fifth is in New Orleans, Louisiana. The 1878 Sanborn Survey of the French Quarter shows, between Chartres and Decatur streets in the lower quarter, a building with a wall thickness notation, a number printed inside the wall outline indicating the wall's depth in inches of 36. Standard commercial masonry construction of the period called for walls between 12 and 18 inches thick. 36 inches was a specification used for one category of structure, fortification. The building is labeled Merchant Storage on the map. No building called Merchant Storage at that address appears in any New Orleans city record. The walls of a standard storage building were not built to 36 inches. Whatever was built at that address, if it was built to the specification the Sanborn cartographer recorded, was not a storage building. The sixth is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The 1876 Sanborn map of the South Side District shows, on a block adjacent to the Monongahela River, a structure that extends below the riverbank line, a building whose footprint, as drawn, partially overlaps the survey boundary of the riverbank itself. Sanborn cartographers were meticulous about boundary lines. They did not draw buildings extending into rivers. What the map shows is a building that the surveyor believed extended into or beneath the river embankment. The notation beside the structure reads iron store, 2 words, nothing more. No riparian construction permit for that block in the period 1860 to 1880 has been located in the Allegheny County permit record. No photograph of any structure at that location from the period shows anything extending to the riverbank. A civil engineer named Harold Krause, hired in 1912 to assess the same block for a proposed rail expansion, noted in his survey report that the riverbank showed evidence of prior excavation inconsistent with natural erosion, specifically cut stone at the base of the embankment that he estimated to be at least 30 years old. His report is held in the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh's Pennsylvania Room. It has never been cited in any official history of the South Side waterfront, but here is what makes these 6 entries something more than a collection of curious anomalies spread across unrelated cities in unrelated decades. A retired Library of Congress map curator named Frances Aldrich spent the last 11 years of her career, from 1979 to 1990, compiling a private catalog of what she called discrepant structures in pre-1880 Sanborn editions. She was not doing this as an official project. She was doing it on her own time, using her access to the collection. Because she had noticed the same thing this investigation has documented, that certain types of structural notations, specific wall thicknesses, subgrade markings, rooftop tower indicators, and courtyard configurations appeared across multiple cities with a regularity that could not be explained by coincidence or by common architectural fashion of the period. Her private catalog, which she described in a 1988 letter to a colleague at the University of Maryland as containing more than 200 individual discrepant entries across 41 cities, was never published. The letter exists. It is held in the University of Maryland Special Collections under the papers of the colleague she wrote to, a map historian named Dr. Robert Calloway. The catalog itself, the 200 entries, was not included with Calloway's papers when he donated them to the university in 1994. His widow told a researcher in 2003 that she had no recollection of the catalog ever being in his possession. The 7th is in Detroit, Michigan. The 1874 Sanborn map of the Eastern Commercial District shows a structure on a block near the old Brush Farm tract with a notation that Sanborn cartographers used for only one purpose: iron construction. Not iron framed. Not iron reinforced. The notation indicates an all-iron structural shell, walls, floor, and roof, of a kind that architectural historians associate with post-1885 construction in American commercial buildings. The building appears on the 1874 sheet. It does not appear in the 1879 revision. No iron building construction permit for that block in the period 1860 to 1875 exists in Wayne County records. The technology to build an all-iron commercial structure existed in 1874, but its use was rare enough that such a construction project would have generated significant press attention. The Detroit Free Press Archive from 1870 to 1876 contains no reference to an iron building on that block. The eighth is in San Francisco, California. The 1877 Sanborn map of the South of Market District shows, on a mid-block parcel between 2nd and 3rd Streets, a structure with a notation that field surveyors used to indicate height of more than 4 stories. In 1877 San Francisco, buildings of more than 4 stories required specific engineering consultation and were notable enough to generate newspaper coverage. No building of more than 4 stories at that address appears in any San Francisco Chronicle, City Directory, or permit record for the period 1865 to 1877. The 1906 earthquake destroyed most of the South of Market District. As with the Chicago fire example, the destruction conveniently eliminates the physical evidence while leaving the map record intact. The 9th is in Baltimore, Maryland. The 1870 Sanborn map of the Inner Harbor Commercial District shows, on a block adjacent to the water, a structure marked with 2 concentric rectangles, a notation that appears in Sanborn Cartographic Convention only for buildings with double-wall construction. Double-wall construction in 1870 was used for one of 2 purposes: cold storage, or structural isolation from vibration or sound. The building is labeled simply as Warehouse No. 4, No Warehouse No. 4 at that address appears in any Baltimore Port Authority record, city directory, or tax roll from the period. The double wall notation is precise and unambiguous. Whatever was stored inside that building, or whatever the owners of that building needed to keep isolated from the outside environment, was not typical commercial cargo. The 10th is in Boston, Massachusetts. The 1872 Sanborn map of the downtown commercial district, produced in the same year as the Great Boston Fire, shows, on a block in the old Cornhill district that was destroyed in November of that year, a below-grade structure marking that indicates a sub-basement passage connecting 2 separate buildings across a shared property line. Connecting sub-basement passages of this kind were used in 19th-century commercial districts for one documented purpose: the movement of goods between buildings without street-level exposure. The 2 buildings connected by this passage are listed on the map as separate properties with separate ownership notations. No easement agreement for a shared sub-basement passage between those 2 properties has been located in the Suffolk County deed record for the period 1850 to 1872. Both buildings were destroyed in the fire. The passage, if it existed, went with them. The Library of Congress has never adequately addressed why structural notations for buildings with no documented construction history appear across dozens of pre-1880 Sanborn editions. It has never explained why iron construction notations, double wall markings, and subgrade passage indicators appear in cities where no permit record confirms those construction methods were ever used at those addresses. It has never explained why Francis Aldrit's 200-entry private catalog, the work of an 11-year effort by a credentialed Library of Congress professional, is not among her colleagues' donated papers, despite being referenced in a letter that is. Why would a Sanborn field surveyor, whose entire professional obligation was accuracy, record a building that was not there? Why does the same rooftop tower notation appear on structures in Memphis, Louisville, and Nashville in the same decade, with the same relative position, when no building permit in any of those cities documents a cupola at any of those locations? Why do subgrade passage markings appear between buildings whose deed records show no shared easement in a city whose fire then destroyed the physical evidence? The honest answer is that we do not know for certain. What we have are the maps themselves, held by the Library of Congress, publicly accessible, drawn by professional cartographers with no incentive to fabricate, and we have a pattern of absence in the permit records, the city directories, the deed records, and the newspaper archives that corresponds to those maps with a consistency that goes well beyond isolated error or coincidence. The Sanborn maps are still there. Every sheet described in this investigation is accessible through the Library of Congress digital collection. You can look at them. You can look at the wall thickness notations, the subgrade markings, the iron construction symbols, the courtyard footprints. You can compare them against the city directories of the same years, which are also digitized and publicly available. What you cannot find in the permit offices, in the county deed records, in the newspaper archives, is the paper trail that should accompany every one of those structures if they were built the way the official history says American cities were built. One permit at a time, one deed at a time, one newspaper announcement at a time. The official record tells us that the buildings of pre-1880 America were documented from the moment of their first shovel to the day they were torn down. What the Sanborn maps tell us is that some of what stood on those blocks did not enter the official record at all. It was simply there, drawn by a cartographer who was only ever trying to be accurate. And then, edition by edition, it was gone. These records survive because someone preserved them. The Library of Congress preserved them, perhaps without fully understanding what was inside them. If you have watched this far, you are one of the people who understands why that matters. Subscribe and share this with someone who still trusts the permit record. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when no one reads the maps carefully enough. Next week, I am examining a specific set of city directories from Philadelphia, published between 1858 and 1871, that list occupants and businesses at addresses where the Sanborn maps show no building at all. An address that the directory lists as occupied, that the map shows as a vacant lot, and that the deed record lists as federally owned land exempt from city tax rolls. A researcher named Thomas Alcott spent 4 years tracking that specific combination before his files were removed from his university office in 1997. One of his colleagues preserved a copy. You will not want to miss it.